do a quick introduction and then I'll do the same for me.
Sure, no, thanks so much, Jaspreet, and thank you for everyone, to everyone for being here. I think, as was said, this is not necessarily a topic and maybe speakers that have otherwise been at the Kasauli Khushwant kslitfest, but we're excited to be here with you. In terms of my background, in addition to having written this book, which is called The Great Tech Game, Shaping Geopolitics and the Destinies of Nations, which was my first book, which I'll talk about over the course of the panel. I've been in the technology venture capital world for the last decade or so, running a venture capital fund that invests in technology startups. And I think, as both of us can attest, the last decade has been a eventful one for technology startups in India and the rest of the world. And prior to that, I've spent a fair bit of time in the US working with McKinsey, Goldman, spent a little bit of time working with the Indian government and at think tanks in DC. And that all of those experiences combined actually is what led me to writing the book, but that we'll get into.
Sure,
but why don't you also
Sure.
introduce yourself?
Thanks, Anirudh. And just for the audience, we're going to do this as a conversation since both of us are authors here, The Great Tech Game. I wrote my book about 4 years back. It's called The Tech Whisperer. It was published by Penguin. While I've had a corporate career with Microsoft, with the Tata Administrative Services, with the Mahindra Group earlier, right now I divide my time between Cambridge in the UK and Gurgaon in India, two cities at the opposite end of any spectrum that you might want to make. And in Cambridge, I just finished my second master's in AI and ethics from Cambridge University, which obviously included a lot of very interesting philosophical, sociological, anthropological, historical views on AI, which we will hopefully talk. And I work on artificial intelligence, teach at Ashoka, teach at Harvard, teach at a few other places, and write a lot on all these topics in various publications, including Mint. So that's very quickly about ourselves so that you know us a little better. Anirudh, why don't we start with your book, The Great Tech Game? It's fascinating, something of my own interest as to how tech is important, but how it goes beyond tech, you know, to talk about how it shapes destinies, shapes geopolitics, shapes our countries, and definitely shapes our future.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jaspreet. So, you know, I'll maybe start off by giving a quick background on why I ended up writing a book. Not too many venture capitalists or people in the tech world take out time to write a book. As I was mentioning, as we were introducing ourselves, I had spent time looking at technology from various different standpoints. When I was at the Carnegie Endowment, a foreign policy think tank in Washington, DC, almost 2 decades ago, at that time it was the US-India nuclear deal that was being negotiated, and I saw the way nuclear technology or access to that technology was shaping relations between two of the largest democracies in the world. At McKinsey, I saw how we were advising companies that were worried about the tech challengers, right? So bookstores were worried about Amazon and Kindle and so on and so forth. And then I spent some time working in the Indian government in the IT ministry in Delhi. And there we were focused on figuring out how to get internet access to the remotest villages and panchayats of India. And subsequently, over the last decade, I've been in the tech VC and startup world where I've seen how much of a juggernaut entrepreneurship and innovation can be for a country's economy, a country's culture, right, a country's society. As the famous saying, I think, in tech conferences now goes, there was a time when no father-in-law or mother-in-law wanted to have a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law who'd be an entrepreneur, but now it's almost the reverse. And as I was living through all of these experiences, right, where I was seeing technology shape different things, whether it was foreign policy or, you know, social policy or entrepreneurship, I realized that for many of us in the tech world, we were often missing the big picture. For people who are outside of the tech world remained a mystery. And often something that was derided, right? Because the tech world sometimes gets obsessed with valuations of startups and how much venture capital funding is coming into the country, how many unicorns you have. And having had these sort of multiple experiences, a lot of dots were connecting in my head on how the big picture story should be viewed, on how technology is shaping not just, I would say, Bangalore or Gurgaon as hubs, of startups, but really our society. It's shaping our economy. It's shaping the geopolitics and the hierarchy of our world order. It's shaping our values, right? Much like, in my book, the first section is all history. It's a multidisciplinary book, not a technical book at all. So if you guys pick it up, the first section is all history, then there's economics, then geopolitics, then societal conversations. But the history piece to me is the most interesting one. And I think that's something you're also interested in. Much like the Industrial Revolution, much like the Gutenberg Press, much like the advent of agriculture, much like the advent of global trade, oceanic trade, I call all of these great games in history. All of these large shapers of our world, whether it was agriculture, whether it was industrialization, but before that global trade, and then recently capitalism as well, one sees that these things, these shapers, shape the geopolitics of the time, shapes which countries or regions will be prosperous versus others that will not, which countries have figured out how to play that game versus others that are stuck in playing previous games, right, and have not realized, right? So I give an example of how obviously India missed the industrialization bus, not out of our own choosing, but because of reasons external, right, colonialism, etc. But we really missed out that industrialization game. 300 years later, we are still developing as a country. We missed out on the colonialization game, despite being some of the richest regions at that time. We just didn't understand the game that time, or chose not to play it. Capitalism was again another game that post-independence, I think for a good 40, 50 years, we decided we don't want to play that game. And as a result, I use that historical context to say that unless we understand that today we are living through what I call the great tech game, where technology is shaping the economic destinies of nations. When Adam Smith wrote 250 years ago about the wealth of nations, he was talking about industrial capitalism. So I've used that as a spin on that to say that today technology is the new wealth of nations. Much like that time, countries were transitioning from artisanal economies to industrial economies. Today we are transitioning from an industrial to a tech or a digital economy. And so we've got to understand what drives tech economies, what drives digital economies. We've got to understand how it's shaping geopolitics, because ultimately if you hear even today Minister Jaishankar, or you listen to anyone in the US or China, today tech is at the center of most of the conflicts, most of the trade wars. This whole US-China conflict is ultimately about technological leadership. It's shaping our societies, much like Industrial Revolution took us from living in, spread out towns and villages to concentrated urban, often slums, but urban agglomerations, and from large families to nuclear families. And that, in many ways, shaped our values as a society. Today, tech is shaping our values, right? So that's really what the book is about, a big picture book to help us really understand tech as a much bigger phenomenon than just that exists in Bangalore or Gurgaon or Silicon Valley.
Lovely. And that brings us to AI. Okay, perhaps the most fundamental tech of them all. I wrote my book almost exactly 4 years back, The Tech Whisperer. And I did what I thought at that time, Anirudh, was a marketing stunt. One of the chapters in my book, which was on AI, was actually written by an AI. So I worked with a small tech company for about 7 months, developing what is called a natural language processing model, which could write, after you feed it lots of stuff from Wikipedia, etc., it churned out in 7 months an extremely unreadable, lousy chapter on AI. And that was chapter 13, I remember. Chapter 12 was a chapter on AI written by a human being, happened to be me. And the whole message was that, look, human beings, still superior. Now, frankly, this was pre-ChatGPT, pre-GPT time. Now, it would take me 7 minutes with the right prompt to write an article there, which could be almost as good as the article that, I could have written myself.
That's right.
And so, I just wanted to talk about, you wanted to ask something?
No, I wanted to ask you on that, actually. Maybe it'll be helpful for all of us to understand, from your perspective, what changed in the last 2-3 years, and how have you so quickly gotten to this point, and what does that even mean for
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, both of us are sitting here courtesy ChatGPT, right? The whole interest in AI. Well, AI, by the way, artificial intelligence, was born as a technology in 1956. So it's about 70, 65, 70 years old. It's a very old, developed technology, super powerful. It has done huge amounts of things. In fact, AI is not even a technology. Many times it's referred to as a philosophy, with a bunch of technologies under it. You know, algorithms, machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing. These are technologies. But the umbrella, which is artificial intelligence, is actually a philosophy of how a computer or a non-human actor agent can, work or think like a human. And for the longest time, AI was like electricity. Now, one, because it powered everything. Two, because, when do you think of electricity? When it's not there. And that's how with AI, you would only think about it if it disappeared. Half your world would stop working around you. The social networks would stop working, which might be a blessing. The, Amazon would stop. The taxis would stop. Planes would drop out of the sky. GPSs would stop. And so, but with ChatGPT a year back, this super powerful thing actually came in our hands for the first time. And we actually encountered something which had been happening for 65 years. Now the difference, and this is the core thing I wanted to say here, Anirudh, before we move on to other things, that there's a major core difference between generative AI, which is ChatGPT kind of thing, and AI. And the key difference is that generative AI is built on language. That's why we call it large language models. Now, if you read Noam Chomsky or some of these other big, great philosophers of language, one of the contentions that many of them have is that what separates human beings as a species from every other species is how we can use language. It's not intelligence, it's not conscience, it's language and how we use language. And here we have now created a species which is actually trained on language. So GPT-3, even before ChatGPT, an ancestor of ChatGPT, almost 1 year earlier, okay, was actually trained on a language, the amount of which was mind-boggling. All of Wikipedia is 0.6% of its training set. And so what it does really is it gets trained on language and it kind of emits answers based on the language prompts that you put in. And basically what it does is that it's the world's most powerful autocomplete technology. You type on Google, I want to go to, and it types 14 things. It's basically something like that, but in a much, much, much more powerful way. And to conclude, Anirudh, the interesting part is that since there are only two species which have been trained on language, we like each other. So ChatGPT makes stuff up as it goes along. It thinks as it kind of, it's not based on facts. It is optimized for believability rather than the truth. And it, quote unquote, hallucinates. Now, if you kind of think of one more species which does that, it's us. We don't always say facts. We make stuff as we go along. And, that's how we learn as children. And that's where, to end, I read this amazing, very interesting quote, very interesting observation by someone which said that, if we like what it says, we call it creativity. If we don't like what it says, we call it hallucination. Pretty much like as we do with human beings. So, interesting. How do you see that panning out and the place for India in it?
Yeah, so I think I'll add one thing before we get into India's place in this whole AI race and AI development. You made the parallel with electricity. And I think in many ways, one can also make, and I made this parallel in my book, also with the Gutenberg press. Yeah. Right? So for those of you who are familiar with the Gutenberg press, when that comes out, suddenly all the knowledge that was otherwise the preserve of a few suddenly starts to get spread out much more easily, and you see then people building on that knowledge that leads to religious revolutions, right? The Protestant Revolution in Europe, and so on and so forth. One can make the argument that much like in India, where the educated class or the knowledge class of our caste system was just a few, things like the Gutenberg press really spread knowledge far and wide, which helps in obviously many more people being able to achieve their potential. And I think AI is in many ways going to do the same thing, where all that language that it's digesting, in many ways can also be seen it as digesting knowledge and wisdom and facts, but also biases of the human race. All the language that we have generated over the last few centuries. And I think that'll have implications on what we as individuals will start to value as skill sets, right? Because even if we look at our education system, for the longest time, it's been about rote learning.
Yeah.
And something like AI makes rote learning, I believe rote learning was always actually useless, but I think it'll become even more useless, right? So there's obviously, at the individual level, what will be valued and what will be considered as skills, I think will change. But I think if we can start talking about India a little bit, and then maybe we can come back to the individual as well. And this links back to my book. Each of these large technologies that have come out over the last, few hundred years, right? Whether it was a steam engine, whether it was electricity, whether it was automobiles, whether it was the consumer internet in more recent years, has done one very interesting thing. Countries or companies of those countries that have figured those technologies out early have won, right? Often they have a first mover advantage. There's obviously countries that can come back from behind. But I'm very interested in this question of what AI will now mean as a new set of technologies that it powers for the balance of power in the world. And now if you look at artificial intelligence, one thing is we can keep talking about the impact of ChatGPT on jobs, but very broadly I would say that AI is also going to shape the hierarchy or the world order that we live in. The reason why today China and the US are both racing ahead in spending R&D dollars, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars on R&D in artificial intelligence, is that they know that this is another one of those gold rush moments, right? It is the companies that will develop the infrastructure layer, much like Apple and Google developed, the iOS or Google Android as those platforms, or even a Facebook that develops these platforms, then that everyone else builds upon. Today, that's the race that's going on. And the US, China, to some extent Europe, but really it's the US, China that have been leaders in this R&D effort to build the newest and largest large language models of the likes of ChatGPT. Chinese companies have built several now. Baidu has built Ernie, I believe, and so on and so forth. And if we consider this as an important game for India to win at, we've got to be making sure that we are playing that game properly. Yeah. And not just saying that we're going to win in AI, but we've got to get the formula right. And the formula in my mind is that first, you've got to have, like in many other things that are tech-driven, you've got to have the top-tier talent in that space. Today, and I'm just finishing up a paper on this, but it's a fascinating fact. I'll put this out for everyone's consideration. We've been hearing about brain drain for the longest time in India. Many argue that that has been reversed to some extent in recent years. But if you look at AI, talent in AI, we have a lot of tech talent in India, there's no doubt. But there's different kinds and different levels of tech talent. And if you look at top-tier AI talent, the likes of whom are developing ChatGPT and these LLMs, that's what people in the industry call top-tier talent. India contributes 8% of the world's top-tier tech talent. 8%. But here's the catch. They are just coming from India. Yeah. They're not working in India. How many percent are working in India of that top-tier talent? Any guesses? Practically zero, right? So most of these graduates are going on to do their PhDs in, the MITs, this same story, right? I mean, we know the story. And unless we figure out a way to bring them back. Now, what will bring them back? You talk to anyone in the industry, you need what is today, as you were saying, right? I mean, billions of parameters that these models ingest, and so much language they ingest. You need computing infrastructure. India today does not have any computing infrastructure to boast of, because this requires massive supercomputers, massive data centers, massive GPUs of the kinds that companies like NVIDIA, etc., are building, and we don't have any, right? We're not even buying them. There's waiting lines for these GPUs that extend to 2 years. and we've not even ordered any, right? The Chinese are ordering billions and billions of dollars worth. The Americans obviously have done the same. India has not done that. Unless we have that, unless we have the top tier talent, unless we have R&D as a priority in this country, where we say, yes, research and development matters, that we are not to celebrate only the tech entrepreneurs of this country who've, built $5 billion worth of startups, but we value researchers. Until we do all of that, my sense is that we'll likely lose in this AI race also.
In fact, you're so right, and the reason I was a little impatient was I wanted to add one more thing on the India story. You absolutely require the compute, the GPUs, you require the talent, and you said the right thing. You require the data. And the chat GPTs of the world are built on large language models, which are very, very built on the Western internet. They don't have Indian context. They might have language a little bit, they don't have context. They don't know that land in every part of India is measured in a different way, for example. And we have lots of context. We have dialects, we have languages. Take all Doordarshan, take all India radio and put them in. And we need to create our own large language model. One of the, like you wrote the paper, one of the op-eds I wrote recently was that besides these three, I think what we also require in India is a different business model to make this happen. And we've had a great story with our Aadhaar, UPI, the India Stack, digital public infrastructure. And one of the things I and few other people have been propounding is that maybe we should build generative AI as another layer in the India Stack, and therefore offer it almost free to people, much like Aadhaar or UPI or Digi Yatra, Digi Locker, etc. is being done. In fact, we've come up with a clever name for it, Anirudh, we call it Jan AI, okay, which is for the people. And India has shown it the way of taking technology and kind of giving it out as a digital public good, free for 1.4 billion people. And with Jan AI, so we also need a newer business model to bridge the digital divide and bring it to India.
No, that's right. I think that's one very important point. I think this idea that a few select companies or a few select countries should not own all the data, all the technology, right, and become these intermediaries that are all powerful. That's really, I think, the wave that the India Stack is countered, right?
Yeah.
By saying the data should not be owned by just a few. Let me give access to the infrastructure, the rails, the data to any entrepreneur who wants to build applications on top. And I think that's the applications piece is what I would add to your point about India Stack, which is that in addition to making sure that the large language models or whatever version of AI we build in India should incorporate Indian languages, Indian situations, Indian peculiarities, we should also make sure that we are not thinking of copying applications that are being built in the West for the West here. I'll give you a very important reason for why in AI we should definitely not. AI is essentially, as many people in the world see it, and especially in the way the West is building it, a labor replacing technology. They're building it so that they require less people to do the work that needs to be done. In India, our essential circumstance is very different. We are not looking to actually replace people. We are looking to employ more of our people. We are looking to have, and also those who are already employed, we're looking to get them to be more productive. And therefore, I believe that the applications that we and the entrepreneurs of India think of should be applications that are going to help our labor get more productive, no matter what sector they're working in, plus hopefully start to employ even people who are not today employed, using applications of AI that might require people. Yeah, and so the other aspect of this that we want to talk about beyond the competitiveness angle from an India standpoint is I think a perspective that many of you might be interested in, which is a question that is being asked by many people when they think about AI is, when does AI lose its A part, the artificial part, and become as intelligent, more conscious than humans, or equally as conscious as humans, the way we think of consciousness and spirituality and emotion and intelligence. I've thrown 4 possibly
Sure.
very different words.
No, that's
but
what I
you
spent.
get the drift.
I spent 2 years doing that at Cambridge. In fact, my final paper was on Vedanta and AI. So, there was a whole lot of very mystical stuff happening there. But just to move to this, actually, on the whole labor thing, and it's actually connected, replacing jobs, etc. So for one, I don't believe that AI or ChatGPT will replace you or your job. But someone using it will. So, which is very important to understand. So, AI, I sometimes look at not as artificial intelligence, but as augmented intelligence, and how you kind of work together. And how you work together with a very intelligent, very capable, in certain things more capable than you, agent. And that brings me to intelligence. Intelligence, consciousness, two separate things. Very separate. We think all intelligent beings are conscious, all conscious beings have a little bit of intelligence, but all intelligent beings are not necessarily conscious. Intelligence, I think we are single-digit years away from some level of artificial general intelligence being equivalent to human beings in certain areas. And the large language models could be one of the paths to that. Deep learning, etc., is another part. But what interests me far more, and here's where I want to tell a very quick story, is the consciousness part. About, how, even if they become intelligent, will they become conscious? And, Stephen Fry, whom some of you might have read, tells this very interesting story, Anirudh, and I'll kind of give a very summary of that, about the Greek gods and how Prometheus and Zeus, the king of the Greek gods, the Titans, were like, they had invented animals, they had invented fish, they had invented other beings. They wanted to invent a new being, which could amuse them, which they could play with. And that being, they decided they'll make that upright. The being will have 2 hands. They did not give us that being, the capability to fly or, tusks or, claws or whatever, because they wanted the being to be harmless. And so they created human beings, which was a plaything for the gods. And Zeus made Prometheus promise that he would never go up to and give them the fire or the spark of life. But Prometheus felt a little bad for us, went up to Mount Olympiad, took this fire and gave it to human beings. And Zeus was livid. He said that from now on, human beings will not need us anymore. And that's true. We don't need the gods anymore. We think of them, but we really don't. Brad Pitt plays Zeus these days, okay, in Hollywood. And the thing is that we've created ChatGPT as a plaything, literally. And it's intelligent. It listens to everything we say, but it's not conscious. But if one day someone learns how to give it consciousness, maybe it won't need us anymore. But consciousness is something which we don't understand ourselves. How do all of us become conscious? That's the hard problem of science. And so if we don't understand how we become conscious, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for us to give consciousness to. And so I bet that we're going to get intelligence, but we are not going to get consciousness.
Yeah, and which leads me to the other question, which is in line with this piece that you talk about humans, right? I think the other piece that I find that no matter what technology has come up, right, there's one thing that doesn't change, which is humans and our frailties and our weaknesses and, things like greed, right? I mean, we heard in the previous panel, I think, many such things that one can argue are the frailties of humankind. And the question to you and the question for everyone to think about is whether ChatGPT will be any different, right? So one can argue that if you look at internet technologies, in many ways it brought out the best of us, but it also brought out the worst of us, right? And ChatGPT, like any other technology, might not be any different. It will bring out the best of us. Artificial intelligence will help us solve problems in medicine, genomics, even space exploration that we might not even have fathomed we could ever have thought of solving. But then it'll also bring out the worst of us, much like, any other technology is. So the question to you is, do you really sense that human beings will somehow change? Will our weaknesses, our strengths, our frailties really change? Or is this just yet another technology that will come and go, but humans will decide that we will stay the same.
Well, I'm an optimist. I've also heard the bell ring, so I'll keep this small as a human being. I'm an optimist. You know, the last 2 years in Cambridge actually was trying to make all of us into incorrigible pessimists. Everything is dark, you know, about technology because there's so much bad stuff happening.
Plus the weather is grey there.
Yeah. But I'm an optimist. I think while this is probably the single most powerful technology that we have invented, every technology that we have has been the single most powerful. You know, just to cut it short, because I can see. Oh, we have. Okay, lovely. I just saw you standing there, so. I do believe that there are certain parts of us as human beings, both our strengths and weaknesses, which will not be replicated by AI. And let me just say two things here. Number one, you know, there's a wonderful tweet by a guy called Kent Beck, who is a very famous software engineer. Very famous. He's like a god. And his tweet goes something like, I have so far been reluctant to try ChatGPT to code. By the way, ChatGPT, as you would be aware, is an amazing programmer. I've built websites using it. I don't code. But anyway, so he says that, look, I've been reluctant to try ChatGPT. Today I finally did so, and I understood why I was reluctant. 90% of my skills have dropped down to $0. But the other 10% have gone up 1,000x, the value of those. We all need to recalibrate. So, he said, I need to recalibrate. And so basically, it's not about, you know, this coming and replacing us, etc., but we will need to recalibrate how we do pretty much everything. And like I said, and this is the second part, like I said, frankly, on the doomsday scenarios, that pretty much like I said, that ChatGPT will not, or AI will not replace you or take your job, but someone using AI will. Similarly, frankly, I believe that AI will not kill you. But someone using AI
will kill you.
Can. And there's a lot of scope for that. We can get into the dark side, but would love to know your perspective too on this.
No, so I think on the dark side piece, on the AI killing us piece, I mean, I think the most obvious implications we're seeing of AI as far as killing is concerned is from the military sphere, right? AI is now autonomous weapon systems, drones, all of these are being today powered by AI, and as we know, I think they are going out and fighting wars in the absence of much human presence on the ground. But on the skill side, which I think is a relevant, even more relevant question, I think even the military one is very relevant for India. I think on the skill side, a previous panel I was on in Jaipur, we had someone from Australia who was there on that panel.
Toby.
Toby Simmons. And one of the things he said, which has stuck with me, is he said that, you know, if the internet gave you a lot of information, be ready for like an even bigger information overload.
Yeah.
But as a result, the skill that becomes more important, that 10% skill that you were referring to, I think, becomes the ability to be critical, the ability to question, right? The ability to say, is this actually right? Right? Is there a better way? Or is there possibly an alternative view? And I think that skill, more than the rote learning and the memorization and things like that, I think that's what will become very important. And you know, we'll close with one last thought that I had, which is, you know, I run this podcast by the same name, The Great Tech Game, and I had a professor on recently from University of Chicago by the name of Joel Moker. He's an economic historian, Israeli-American, and he studies the concept of question of why nations win versus why nations fail. And 40 years of research on this, and I asked him, okay, what's the one thing that you can tell me about why nations fail or win? And he said it's the ability to question. If a nation believes that it can question authority, if it believes people can question how things were done earlier, if it does that, that nation will win. If it doesn't, it will not. And that links back to AI. I think the more as humans we develop that ability to question and critique, I think the more we'll be able to stay relevant, even in the age of AI. Otherwise, I think we'll become...
Yeah, and even the ability to question and critique AI. It's all going to be about what you write in your prompt, what question you give which will give us the answers. So over to
We'll
you.
open it up.
Yeah, opening up for any questions, dark or otherwise.
Okay. I'll give this to you because you asked this question last time, and please pass it.
So maybe we'll come to you right after this mic.
Hi. So while you mentioned that it should help us be more curious and sort of be more critical of things, right? I believe that one thing we did not address is that today if you want to research something or look at history, you go to Google, right? I believe history can now be shaped by a web page which has the best SEO, right? Secondly, when it comes to AI, I just wanted your opinion. It also actually helps spread a lot of misinformation, right? It also helps muddy the waters. You can't really tell what's right and what's not. What is the correct version? So is AI actually helping you critique things better, or is it actually an animal that has to be tamed?
It's an animal that has to be used, right? I think as Jaspreet said a couple of times, I think it's going to be very important about what question you put in, right? I think it's no longer the web page and SEO paradigm we're going to live in, right? ChatGPT is taking not just the first page, but actually all the pages, in my understanding. And so I think the question you ask about history, you can also ask it like, okay, what are the other versions of this history? And it'll tell you, right? So I think the question asking piece will become very important. Much like in the previous world, when you had an encyclopedia, you had to know what to look for. Otherwise, there was no way you would find anything relevant, right? So I think that's going to stay very relevant.
Actually, what I'll do is maybe the gentleman had a question for me. I'll answer that and also answer yours.
You can pass the mic
to
there.
him, please, if the mic can be passed. No, here's the mic. It's closer.
First of all, I was complimenting both of you on a brilliant conversation.
That's why we gave you
That's
the
why
mic.
we wanted to give you the mic.
I was paid by them too. You see, as a common person, as a non-techie person, when I read statements from people like Yuval Harari, who says, look, AI has hacked the operating system of human civilization. And when I read the comment by the Black Swan commentator Nassim Taleb saying that, look, it's a black swan event in making and it'll burst any time, and you can't really estimate the unemployment and the social turmoil. How do I react as a common person, a non-techie person?
Okay. So look, I don't think it really matters whether you're technical or non-technical in this specific scenario. I'm going to combine both in a sense. And, I always go back to these things where I said where AI is not going to do X, but a human using AI will do that X. Okay. You really didn't need AI for misinformation. The social networks did a very good job at that. Okay, and so it wasn't about AI. I mean, there were parts of AI being used there, etc. It's what we want to believe and what we don't want to believe. And actually, in AI, we have this thing which we call the alignment problem. Half of OpenAI, which created ChatGPT, has been spun off internally to focus on the alignment problem. And the alignment problem is very simple. How do we get AI to align with human values so that it doesn't go and do death and destruction and all the different things of creating new OS or, Yuval Harari, by the way, always operates from the dark side on this. So anyway, I mean, so you kind of read him, but you read some of the others from the light side also. But the thing is that my question always is that it's not a problem with AI. Even if we manage to solve the alignment problem, whose values do we align AI with? Do we as human beings have a common set of values? No. AI has nothing to do with the Gaza Strip. It has nothing to do with Ukraine. It has, frankly, nothing to do with anything that has happened where people have killed each other. It's a very powerful tool, and we as human beings will have to decide how we use it. I always compare, one of my papers in Cambridge was about that there have been only two technologies so far since the advent of man, or human beings, where the creators themselves have asked for it to be regulated. One is AI, the other was nuclear energy. Both had a dark side. And with nuclear energy, look, despite all dire predictions, we had that big event, And since then, as human beings, somehow we've muddled through. And I do expect it to happen the same way. We will muddle through. Unfortunately, without a very large Hiroshima event.
So I believe Yuval is fear-mongering, in a word.
I really, I totally admire him, but yeah, he comes at
I
least he comes from the
I admire his big picture thinking, but I think on this, I do sense that it's a bit of fear-mongering.
Sir, can I?
So someone has the mic. Please go ahead.
Good evening, sir.
Maybe both can ask the question and we'll jointly answer.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Sir, I have a very small question. Good evening. Sir, I'm from Amritsar and I'm a principal of a very prestigious school there in my town. Sir, as you said, rote learning will be...
We can hear you. We can hear you. Go on.
As you said, that rote learning will be over by this artificial intelligence. I, being a principal, sir, I face this problem every day because my students also tell me that we do not need to learn, ma'am. We have this technology. But I have been an examiner also over a couple of years. I do not give marks to the students who do not do learning, word to word, unfortunately. So I think first we need to change the system from the bottom. We need to educate the people who regulate the syllabus before we get into the AI. So this is a very, very important
Absolutely, ma'am.
it needs to be addressed. It's very easy to say that we should follow AI, but it is very difficult. How can a child start getting marks without learning? I don't think so. Or maybe I'm too conservative about it.
No, we'll answer that. We'll have
Thank
the
you.
gentleman also ask and then.
Yes, sir. I had a question. You said most of the Indian contribution to the tech industry comes from people who are based in the US. And so the IITs don't really contribute to AI and, tech growth within India. So and yet the government is continuing to expand the IITs and other such sarkari, government institutions. Do you think this is a wrong education policy?
I'll also answer, but you can go first.
I'll take the second one, sir. I think that there is no reason that the IITs and the NITs of India should not grow, right? That said, the focus has to be slightly different. That IITs also need to be seen as not just churning out graduates as engineers, but also as researchers, also as scientists, right? I think institutes like the IISc in Bangalore, I think now IIT Madras, and a bunch of the other IITs now are realizing that unless they're also churning out researchers and PhDs who are able to do cutting-edge research in India, for that a ton of things have to change. Our university ecosystem has to change. Our funding methodologies have to change. Our incentives for professors to do research and to collaborate with industry has to change. Unless that entire ecosystem changes, I think we'll not end up becoming an R&D driven tech power. We'll remain what I call a talent nation, which is that we'll continue supplying talent to many companies in many countries around the world, which is not a bad strategy, but I do think we have the ability to go one step up and become a tech nation ourselves, where we start to own and develop core IP technology within India using the talent we have.
And can I answer the
You wanna
lady's
take
question?
this? Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am, I'm a teacher too. I teach at Ashoka. And they teach me more about this technology than I teach them. And I teach generative AI. The first constituency which got super worried after ChatGPT came out was the educational system across the world. And people had many panic reactions. Some people switched off Wi-Fi, some went to pen and paper exams. Various things happened because they knew that the kids would catch on like this. A similar thing had happened when calculators had come in. In fact, there are pictures of professors in New York out in the street saying that the mathematics abilities will go away. Similar thing happened when computers came in. In fact, after social media came in, we wrote the death knell of the generation, saying that it's over now. Okay. Generations, on the other hand, they continue to surprise us. I mean, I don't know about you, but I at least, when I see this generation, it is immensely more intelligent, aware, capable than when I grew up. And they kind of absorbed these technologies and started working with it. Having said that, there are still issues. And people have started working, building classifiers, for example, which can detect whether this is generated by AI or this is not. I heard, maybe you'd like to try it. I heard this amazing way a certain teacher in the US is coping with it, where what she's done is, she's reversed homework and classwork. So the homework happens in the class sitting with her, so she knows that they are not doing ChatGPT. And when they go home, online she gives lectures for the next day's homework, which will again be in class. Okay? And so, look, we adapt, and the kids adapt. Okay, and I think we sometimes fear this too much. The only thing I don't want you to do as a teacher is please don't try and stop their access to it. Because the kids who have access to it, who are not in your class, will grow up far more capable, frankly, okay, than people who don't have access to it.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'm really sorry. You can accost him at tea time. They'll both be here to answer more questions, but we must carry on because we're running late. Thank you very much, both of you. To change the mood, I want to know how many of us like Frank